Russia and China would drag on a multi-year stalemate where neither side makes much progress and both sides declare peace simply because the war becomes costly. Economically speaking, Russia has an even worse chance of neutralizing China as its own economy is a fraction of China's and shrinking. With the world blacklisting Russia since its invasion, it's lost any leverage it might possess over China. Those problems are magnified exponentially when facing off against the United States. But the U.S. has a third advantage. It wields far more political might than either Russia or China. The world currently exists largely under the leadership of the United States and enjoys the benefits of having allies and strategic partnerships all over the world. But let's just say, somehow, the U.S. and China are both militarily, politically, or economically subjugated by Russia. One day, first we can expect Russia to export its own authoritarianism around the world. There's nothing an autocrat like Vladimir Putin fears more than being removed from power, and Russia has a long history of violently removing rulers from power. Thus, to keep the world under Russia's yoke, we would see the end of the age of free, open media. Instead, news outlets would be nationalized exactly the same way they were inside the Soviet bloc during the Cold War. Information would be tightly controlled, and their opinions violently suppressed. Those who defy the state would face steep fines or jail time. The more closely aligned with Russia a nation is, the more subversive the offender is seen as. Worse consequences such as death are not out of the question. Russia currently ranks 10th on the global impunity index for killing journalists. That's hardly surprising for a country that sent assassins all the way to Britain to murder a defector who slandered Putin's regime. Modern Russia tightly controls information, and it's quite good at it. While a few independent media outlets do exist in a rapidly decreasing number ever since the Ukrainian invasion, most of Russia's media is nationalized and gets its talking points directly from the Kremlin. Russia is adept at hiding suppression of free speech. As laws meant to protect the people, such as the current law that promises up to 15 years in prison for anyone speaking about the truth of the Ukrainian invasion, Russia's enacted this law to supposedly combat misinformation that hurt national morale.
Freedom adamant shit.
One of the West's most cherished values is also technically non-existent in Russia. So while on paper you are allowed to stage protests, you must receive a permit to do so. Perhaps unsurprisingly, you're never going to get that permit to protest something the state doesn't want you to protest. Russia has the vague appearance of liberal values, but is in fact one of the world's most autocratic states. What's important, though, is maintaining the illusion to avoid full-blown dissent and revolution. And this is exactly what you can expect to see happening in your own country if Russia ruled the world. If you don't like what Russia's doing, you better keep it to yourself, because in a world dominated by Russia, your own government will punish you for speaking out. It happened during the Cold War, and it would happen again. To achieve this, Russia would install pro-Kremlin leaders around the world. Much like during the Soviet bloc days, you would still likely be allowed to vote, but only from a pool of candidates approved by your government, which itself would be handpicked by the Kremlin. And so, opposition candidates might even be allowed to vote in the same way that they're allowed inside Russia today. But more often than not, these opposition candidates would meet with unfortunate ends. Many would suddenly be accused of tax fraud or similar crimes and imprisoned or disqualified from running for office, while others would simply be murdered. This was Putin's answer to the challenge from Boris Nemtsov, a Russian politician who publicly called for the public to march against Putin's government for his invasion of Ukraine in 2014. Nemtsov was shot by an unknown assailant as he crossed the bridge at 11:30 p.m. on February 27, 2015. Life under Russian global occupation, however, would be all bad, except for being constantly spied on and having no civil liberties. Unlike the Soviet Union, Putin's Russia is not communist and has fully embraced the free market. After all, it made Putin personally extremely rich, though much of that wealth has simply been stolen from oligarchs that dared to oppose Putin. You could expect to have much of the same luxuries you enjoy today, but the global economy would remain largely undisturbed. However, you can forget about social media apps like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Instead, you have the equivalent of their Chinese counterparts, heavily monitored and censored platforms where the government can and will punish you for producing material they find unacceptable for public decency. Both Russia and China's case happens to involve anything that goes against the official government position, though thankfully, unlike China, Russia really has no problem with silly dances and K-pop boy bands, so you could still enjoy both. What the world would lose under Russian leadership is not so much its material prosperity, but its freedom of self-determination. The liberal values that Western democracies are built on would be stripped away one by one, because those same liberal values present a challenge to the authoritarian model. Any opinion contrary to the official state position would not be tolerated, and your national government would be made up of Kremlin-approved leadership that works to support a Russian-first agenda. As Putin today gathers much support from ultra-conservative Russians, you can also expect to see a dramatic reversal in race and sex equality, as well as the rights of LGBTQ citizens. Nationalism would be on the rise around the world, though ultimately all would swear allegiance to one man and one man alone, your new Vladidadi, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Thankfully, to even come close to achieving global hegemony, Putin would first have to neutralize both China and America. If Russia's invasion of Ukraine has proven anything, though, it's that Russia is completely incapable of such a task. If anything, Putin must accept that he now lives in a world dominated by the West. Ultimately, it's up to the Russian people if they're willing to turn into a modern North Korea-style permanent kingdom, or if they'll remove Putin and its entry into power and end Russia's decades-long zero-sum game versus the world. Because while Putin is busy telling his own population that the West hates them, us Westerners are too busy enjoying euphoria, stupid TikTok dances, and the latest Pokemon game to care about a rival. Russia, it's the most advanced stealth fighter ever developed, capable of defeating any radar ever invented, and they can kill 10 American F-22 Raptors with just one missile. At least if you listen to the Russian Ministry of Defense. As an aircraft, the Russians claim is more advanced than the American F-22 and F-35, conspicuously absent in the skies of Ukraine, exactly where it's needed the most by Russian forces. The Su-57 is a Russian multi-role fighter that's Russia's first attempt at a fifth-generation aircraft. It was conceived in 1999 after its predecessor, the Mikoil Project 144, proved to be entirely too expensive to actually put into production. Project 144 was meant to be an answer to America's own F-22, which was at the time nearing completion and initial operational capability. However, the collapse of the Soviet Union led to an economic crisis, and the project struggled to find adequate funding. The 144 would have its maiden flight in February 2000, and then be canceled shortly after. The C-57, NATO codename Felon, was meant to build upon the successes of the 144 and build a true fifth-generation fighter. By now, the United States was starting to churn out the F-22 Raptor. Russia had no answer to this critical threat, but almost inevitably, the Felon ran into its own financial difficulties, and the program that was meant to produce a fleet of fighters by the mid-2000s would deliver its first operational aircraft in 2020, and Russia couldn't afford to produce the C-57 on its own, though. Troubles began early when Russia and India signed an agreement to co-develop the aircraft in September 2010. As the project evolved, however, Indian engineers voiced serious concerns about the aircraft's capabilities and survivability against American fifth-generation fighters. In 2014, India had lost faith in the Su-57 and formally abandoned the program, leaving Russia to finance it on its own. This immediately put a massive financial strain on Russia, further compounded by sanctions and high-technology goods from the West after its annexation of Crimea. Su-57 struggled through development, and the fleet, once envisioned to consist of over 100 aircraft, ended up producing only a dozen or so test models. In 2018, Russia claimed that the Su-57 took part in combat operations in Syria. However, there's no real proof that the jet performed any combat duties in the country. It's very likely that Russia merely deployed the plane there to fly a few non-combat sorties so as to attempt to rouse interest from foreign investors, a very common tactic by the Russian defense industry. With a poorly diversified economy under pressure from sanctions, Russia relies heavily on foreign buyers to fund its weapons development programs. Despite no verifiable proof of the plane's combat record, Russia claims that it partook in combat operations both in Syria and now in Ukraine, where Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed that Su-57s took part in operations to neutralize Ukrainian air defenses, eliminating multiple Ukrainian surface-to-air missile attacks. Since we've all learned that Russia literally never flies ever, this is an impressive feat for an airplane that's technically still in development. What's more impressive about this claim, however, is the fact that the Su-57 is now even believed by Western observers to be a true stealth aircraft, merely one with stealth characteristics. Observers point to difficulties by the Russians in joining panels of the body together tightly enough to reduce radar return, as well as its glaringly non-stealthy engines. The body of the aircraft is also significantly less stealthy than American counterparts, giving out far larger radar returns from the sides and rear. This, however, is in line with the Russian philosophy of operating aircraft. While looking at the safety of ground-based air defenses, the Russians simply couldn't afford to field an all-aspect stealth aircraft, and thus focused only on frontal stealth. The aircraft also appears to lack another quality of a fifth-generation fighter, dealing capabilities. While tests are underway to have the Su-57 speak with a drone companion, this is far from the capabilities of the U.S. F-35, which can operate as a sort of mini air control platform in place of traditional main-wings, speaking with a variety of friendly aircraft, helping guide pilots and planes to their targets. However, the Su-57 does have some design advantages over real fifth-generation aircraft in America's arsenal. For one, it's far more maneuverable than any U.S. aircraft, and this is a big clue in the fact that the Russians know this is not aimed here to an American fifth-generation fighter. That's because the super maneuverability is not the design feature of a traditional fifth-gen aircraft, which are designed to operate as assassins, not night fighters. F-35s and F-22s are built to engage enemy targets from beyond visual range. It advanced AIM-120B missiles that have ranges in excess of 90 miles. Not only is this missile range outside the range of most other enemy missiles, but the stealth characteristics of F-22 or F-35 means that an enemy being fired on would even be able to detect a stealth fighter at threats much closer, estimated at about 3 dozen or so miles. With limited internal payloads of 6 to 8 missiles, stealth aircraft should never be involved in a dogfight. Thus, super maneuverability is only desired if you have reason to believe your aircraft will be forced into dogfights because it's not stealthy enough or has the targeting capabilities to engage in long-range fight. So while the Su-57 is capable of some truly impressive acrobatic feats, this would be meaningless in over 90% of engagements against an adversary such as the U.S. Air Force, further giving clues to the fact that the Su-57 is not a true stealth aircraft, or its cheek-mounted radars, which allow it to guide missiles to target at far more extreme angles than its American counterparts. This allows the Su-57 to turn further away from its target than an American plane and still maintain a radar line. But you only build this capability if you expect your aircraft to have to fight at close ranges where extreme maneuvers are required, or if you expect your aircraft to have to dodge or defend against enemy missiles or guide itself to the target. It's likely the Russian knew from the start the felon would be detectable at far greater range than U.S. aircraft and would need the ability to maneuver away from incoming missiles while maintaining a lock for its own. Despite this, the Russian Ministry of Defense claims the Su-57 is not just a match, but superior to the F-22 and F-35. If that's the case, then where is Russia's premier aircraft when its army needs it the most? In the skies over Ukraine. First, if all claims about the Su-57 are true, Russia simply wouldn't be able to field them in large enough numbers to make much of a difference. Currently, there are only about a dozen or so Su-57s in operation. Most of these are test aircraft not meant for combat duty. This likely only leaves just over half a dozen that could carry weapons to target successfully. There's no evidence outside of Russian claims that this has actually happened. The best the world can manage is a video of an aircraft with a similar shape to the Su-57 captured on video early in the war carrying out an air-to-ground attack. Most experts agree that if the Su-57 is truly engaged in combat with Ukraine, then it's not seeing frontline duty. Rather, the plane is likely only firing standoff attack munitions at long ranges from the safety of Russian airspace. Armed with the right weapons, the Su-57 could potentially stay out of range of Ukrainian air defenses and destroy them, as claimed by Russia. But there's practically no chance that Russia is willing to risk flying its flagship aircraft over the front lines, where it could potentially be shot down, causing Russia heaps of international embarrassment, at least more than it's earned so far. This is doubly true when you consider that Russia also fears Western weapons employed by Ukraine. It knows for a fact that Western nations are feeding a steady diet of intelligence to Ukraine's armed forces. So why is the Su-57 not in operation over Ukraine? First, there's simply not enough of them to be worth employing. Russia has goals of just over 100 of the fighter by 2027, something that is completely unrealistic given extreme Western sanctions against the nation. If your military is having to strip washers and microwaves for microchips, you're not going to be fielding 100 stealth fighters in 5 years. Secondly, the plane was almost certainly not nearly as capable as Russia claims it to be. And the last thing Russia wants is the embarrassment of having one shot down by Ukraine. Russia has lost an estimated 144 aircraft in the war, with 2 dozen others being frontline manned fighters or ground attack aircraft. The threat environment is too high for Russia to risk a hard disaster that would ensure if a felon was shot down by the Ukrainians. Soviet Afghan war raged for 10 years and killed over 15,000 Russian soldiers. It was a devastating and costly campaign for the Soviet Union that directly led to its downfall and collapse. On February 24th, 2022, Putin said, "Hold my beer," and launched an even worse military disaster. But is Putin's Ukrainian invasion really a failure, or are we all guilty of falling for Western propaganda as Russia would claim? Getting good intelligence on the ongoing invasion of Ukraine is difficult, which makes drawing conclusions equally difficult. Wars are very dynamic things, and what starts out blazingly well can end in disaster or quagmire, just as the United States after 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. In both cases, U.S. forces utterly decimated the conventional forces of each nation, and spent 20 years fighting an insurgency, only to leave with a strategic defeat that left the situation worse for America than before the invasion. But Putin's invasion of Ukraine has had immediate and very large red flags straight from day one that signal this will be one of Russia's worst defeats since the start of World War II. For starters, it's become abundantly clear that Vladimir Putin was operating on very faulty intelligence when he launched the invasion. Shortly before Russian forces moved to staging areas, he tasked his intelligence apparatus with infiltrating Ukraine, bribing or intimidating Ukrainian military and political officials into cooperating with Russia. These intelligence agents were also supposed to take the general temperature of the population in order to gauge whether or not Ukraine could muster the will to fight an invasion. Perhaps unsurprisingly for the Russian dictator, the verdict was exactly what he wanted to hear. Ukraine, not just ready for an invasion, but its population would welcome Russian soldiers with open arms and armed borscht. Well, that's the problem with being a dictator surrounded by yes men. Nobody's going to tell you the truth. The second problem with running such a regime is that your underlings are no doubt just as murderous and corrupt as you are. So it was of no surprise when rumors began to circulate that the Russian intelligence agents had not just borscht their job, but had actually siphoned off large amounts of funds dedicated to their intelligence operations into private accounts. To be fair, Russia's operatives had succeeded in some ways. For instance, when the invasion reached Kherson, the bridges leading to the vitally important city were supposed to have been mined and prepped for demolition. Somebody, though, had ordered the mines and explosives removed, clearing the way for Russian invaders to cross the bridges. President Zelensky would respond by firing multiple senior political leaders from the region. Yet overwhelmingly, as Russian troops crossed the border into Ukraine, they were met with Molotovs and Kalashnikovs, not borscht and hugs, as